Good afternoon. Welcome to the Surrey Board of Trade this afternoon. I'm Anita Huberman, CEO of the Surrey Board of Trade, and I'm also an honorary captain of the Royal Canadian Navy. Thank you for virtually attending today's event, which is a discussion with Canada's leader of the official opposition, the Honorable Erin O'Toole, co-hosted by the Surrey Board of Trade and the South Asian Business Association. I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the unceded territory of our Coast Salish peoples, specifically the Kwantlen, Katzie, Semiahmoo, and Tsawwassen First Nations. Events simply do not take place at the Surrey Board of Trade without the support of sponsors. Thank you so much to our presenting sponsor this afternoon, the Port of Vancouver, our supporting sponsor, CN Rail, and our business and international trade center sponsors at the Surrey Board of Trade, the law firm of Fasken, BDC, and the Chambers of Commerce Group Insurance Plan, sponsored by S&F Benefits. Thank you so much for your support to Surrey's city building business organization. I'd like to recognize some government officials that are on the Zoom call with us today. Thank you again for being with us this afternoon. We begin by recognizing Suk Dhaliwal, MP for Surrey Newton, Tamara Jansen, MP for Surrey Cloverdale, Carrie Lynn Finley, MP South Surrey White Rock, Teiko Von Hapta, MP for Langley Aldergrove, Nellie Shin, MP for Port Moody, Coquitlam. And our City of Surrey councillors are Linda Annis and Steve Pettigrew joining us this afternoon. Thank you so much for being here with us. Just some instructions before we begin. All of the attendees are muted. If you do have a question, please put it in the chat function of the Zoom technology. After our distinguished guest speaks, I will get to the questions. If we're not able to get to your question, we will respond to you after the session is over. I just wanted to say a couple of things before we get right into our distinguished speaker presentation. The Surrey Board of Trade, we support business, bring business into the city. We have the only pandemic rapid response business center in British Columbia. That means we are your concierge of connections. We instigate change at the different levels of government. We have on the ground intelligence reports, pulse surveys to identify what is happening on the ground during this pandemic so that we can advocate on your behalf. All of my team are there for you to answer any question that you have. And we've been doing this since the pandemic began in March. And many of my staff also speak a variety of languages. The South Asian Business Association, a third of Surrey's population, is of South Asian origin, and we're very pleased to have this ongoing partnership with them. They're a volunteer group of South Asian leaders that partner together and bring together stakeholders to discuss a variety of issues affecting our city, affecting our region, affecting our nation. Surrey is going to be the largest city in British Columbia very soon. We're a border city. A third of our population is under the age of 19, and most newcomers settle in Surrey as well. I wanted to ensure that the leader of the official opposition knew that we also have the greatest number of manufacturers in British Columbia right here in Surrey. A third of our land base is agricultural. We also have our international shipping facility, Fraser Surrey Docks. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure, my honor to introduce your speaker this afternoon. He is Canada's leader of the official opposition. He enrolled in the Royal Canadian Air Force when he was only 18 years old. His time in the Air Force took him across Canada. After 12 years of service, he retired from the military and spent the next decade working in the private sector as a corporate lawyer. He is a founding member of the board of directors for the True Patriot Love Foundation, a charity that serves our veterans and our military families across Canada. He previously served as parliamentary secretary to the Minister of International Trade before becoming Minister of Veteran Affairs. And after serving as the Conservative Shadow Minister of Foreign Affairs, he is now, ladies and gentlemen, the leader of Canada's official opposition. Please help me welcome the Honorable Erin O'Toole. Erin, over to you.
Well, thank you very much for that kind and enthusiastic introduction, Captain Huberman. I was a captain in the Air Force, which is a much lower rank than captain in the Royal Canadian Navy. So I'm proud to salute you and your great work supporting our men and women in uniform, particularly our Pacific Navy and the men and women and their families associated with it. So thanks for giving that extra for our military families. I'm also really glad to be on the call with many really good friends and excellent members of Parliament that represent British Columbia in Parliament. And Carrie-Lynn Finlay, Nellie Shin, Tamara Jensen, Teiko Van Popta. I'll even say hello to Suk Dhaliwal, who is not on the same side as us. We're keeping the seats warm on the opposition side for Suk and his colleagues after the next election. But it's great to see so many colleagues join an exciting afternoon. It's good to be with you with the South Asian Business Association and the Surrey Board of Trade, a partnership that I think is an example of partnerships that we need to build across the country. The last time I was in beautiful BC was mid-February. If you remember well, that was a few weeks really before we started getting into major health changes and shutdowns with COVID. While it's only 9 months ago, it seems like an eternity now. I'm sure it's the same for you. And friends, there is no sugarcoating it. This has been a difficult year for Canada and for Canadian families, possibly our most difficult year. This pandemic has upended everything in our daily life. And while provincial governments have managed to respond quickly to the acute health aspects of the pandemic, the national response was not as effective, and the statistics show that. Canada has one of the highest unemployment rates amongst G20 nations. Sectors like manufacturing, including some in Surrey, have seen a double-digit decline in revenues. Airlines are experiencing a 95% reduction over levels from the period last year. Small businesses are teetering on the edge of insolvency, and some estimates suggest that 60% of restaurants in Canada could close before the new year. Conservatives have pushed for a smarter response to many of the emergency programs. We've supported the government where we could, but have asked for better on emergency business accounts, wage subsidy, and rent support. We were doing that because we were listening to business owners. We were listening to large employers and unions. The Trudeau government, and often, were building complex and cumbersome programs based on an Ottawa knows best approach when that's not what we needed. Just think about the fact that in 2019, the government turned off Canada's world-leading pandemic early warning system. In late January, BC Conservative MP Todd Doherty began asking questions in the House of Commons about the risks of what was called the novel coronavirus on flights from China to Canada. This was followed up again in February. And sadly, rather than to respond to these suggestions and concern from health experts, the government tried to demonize people for even asking these questions. This slow response on the border led directly to a spike in cases in cities with international airports and direct flights between China and Iran. Airports like Toronto in my province and Vancouver in yours. The economic response from the Trudeau government was just as late and confused. Rather than preserving jobs and maintaining as much economic potential as possible through a serious and swift wage subsidy program, the government fumbled the wage subsidy, and then they created a simple and no rules, no controls emergency support program called the CERB. This response has led to higher unemployment, distortion in the labor markets for service and other industries, and it began to change the culture of work in Canada. because they added students to the CERB program and actively incentivized young people without dependents to collect assistance rather than to work with small businesses who were struggling to maintain operations in the pandemic. We must also remember that the Canadian economy was already showing serious signs of weakness before the pandemic hit. There were large deficits being run, structural deficits, and taxes were being raised in good economic times. Ideological policies like Bill C-69, tanker bans, pipeline cancellations, bad trade deals, and the inability to negotiate tariff avoidance caused the Canadian economy to see $160 billion in capital investment leave the country in the last 4 years. You've seen this firsthand with the closure of more than half a dozen sawmills throughout British Columbia. And our aluminum smelter in Kitimat, one of the greenest operations of its kind in the world, was left out to dry by the Trudeau government. Friends, I don't mean to sound so dire and grim. That's not my nature. But the reality is our country is at a crossroads under the Trudeau government. This is my greatest worry. The Liberal government doesn't seem to understand you need to create wealth in order to redistribute it. But the problems we're facing aren't insurmountable. I believe in this country and what it offers our citizens, and I want to prove that to you. I'm a middle-class kid from Bowmanville, Ontario, who was raised to work hard, help my neighbor, and strive to be the best I could be. I was taught if you did that, opportunities would present themselves. This grounding led me to serve 12 years in the Canadian Armed Forces, starting at CFB Chilliwack. And then after my military time, a decade in the private sector. My first job was as a dishwasher and short order cook in high school. And my last job before politics was as a corporate lawyer for one of Canada's largest law firms. Every job I had, I worked hard at and I valued. I've pumped gas. I've inspected pipelines. I've also advised one of the most respected global companies in the world when I worked as legal counsel to Procter & Gamble in Canada. I learned lessons on every job. I valued every experience, and every job I got because of my merit and my willingness to work, not because of my last name or who I knew. I got it because of the values I was raised with. I respect people that work hard to provide for their family, whether they're a unionized plant worker in a manufacturing facility or a small business owner, whether they get up at 5 a.m. to put on a uniform of service in Mississauga, Ontario, or at 5 a.m. to open their business in Surrey. There's a nobility in that act of discipline and drive to work. We cannot lose that in our country. I will not let us lose that. I believe in hard work and unleashing the incredible potential of Canada. That potential is often best seen by new arrivals to our country. And I know, Anita, you see this in Surrey all the time. I'm continually amazed when I meet recent immigrants to Canada who within one generation of arriving have opened a business, enjoyed success, and are now employing dozens of other families because of their hard work and because they seized the opportunity that is Canada. This is the Canadian dream many of you on this call know very well. The hardware stores in Surrey, the trucking companies, the food import businesses, the manufacturing companies, they're all Canadian success stories, and you've all been working hard to survive throughout COVID. I believe in building partnerships with organizations like yours, with provinces, with Indigenous groups, with the private sector, and with nonprofits. Ottawa does not always know best, but we should know best on how to reach out and leverage Canadian ideas and innovation. I believe in championing Canadian energy, softwood, rare earth minerals as the most environmentally conscious, ethically developed, and the most engaged with Indigenous partners in the world within Canada's most transparent and reliable regulatory framework in the world. We need to get this country working again, whether it's someone working hard at a checkout line in a grocery store in the pandemic, a parts supplier competing with the world, our frontline nurses and PSWs and physicians. Hard work emboldens the soul. It builds families who build communities, who build our country. Fortunately, you can count on MPs like those in Surrey and like my friends on this call to fight for businesses and families. Many of the MPs have been fighting for businesses and even come from a business background in their time before politics. We need more voices in Ottawa that stand up for companies and businesses like Jacqueline and Barbara's 7 Rooms Home Decor, like Gifts in Ocean Park. Having overcome challenges within COVID, Jacqueline and Barbara had to shut down without any rent subsidies, but they rebranded and they relaunched and are working hard to make this business a success. They are the small entrepreneurs we need to help get back on their feet. Fortunately, strong MPs like Carrie Lynn had their back, fought for them. People like Tamara Jansen, they've been strong voices pushing back about unfair business audits the Liberal government were unleashing on small businesses in the middle of the pandemic. We had voices in our caucus a few weeks ago bringing up SMEs in Surrey, in Cloverdale, in Langley, who are being branded as tax cheats and audited as they're trying to survive. MPs and our caucus have been bringing up some of these cases in the press, including those of Shiraz and Viva Mexico in Langley, BC, and Naka Bistro and Dublin Crossing on the Fraser Highway. These restaurants are run by a dedicated staff and need voices in Ottawa speaking up for them. This crisis and the rebuilding from it will take grit, bold decisions, and plan to chart our course forward. We need to build partnerships like with the Surrey Board of Trade. COVID has set us back, but COVID will not stop us. With the right ideas, with principled and ethical leaders who understand the value of a job, whether it's at a restaurant, a gas pump, or in Parliament. With a government that will put the prosperity of Canadians ahead of special interests of a select few, Canada will emerge from COVID-19 stronger, richer, and more determined than ever before. That's my mission. That's the mission of the Conservative Party of Canada. And I hope you feel this is something you want to learn more about. If you like what you hear or are worried about the future your children or grandchildren are facing, all I'm asking is for more Canadians to take another look at the Conservative Party of Canada and this kid from Bowmanville, Ontario. We're here to fight for you. We're here to fight for this great country and to build it back stronger after COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erin. I wanted to ask you some questions that we have from the Surrey Board of Trade and from our audience today. And then we'll follow with a thank you by the Port of Vancouver officially to you. Number one, international trade is one of the ingredients to economic recovery. Surrey is a border city. If you were Prime Minister of Canada, what would your first steps be in working with the potential new US president?
Well, thanks, Anita. A critical question. The US are our largest trading partner. They're also our most important security ally. And there are family, business, and person-to-person ties going back to the founding of both of our countries. That's why I've been so disappointed that Canada was subject to steel and aluminum tariffs that smarter leadership could have avoided. We got worse outcomes in the Nafta renegotiation than Mexico did. The aluminum produced in British Columbia is at a deficit to transship Chinese steel into aluminum or into Mexico that was permitted under this agreement. I call that part of the deal the biggest trade failure in Canadian history. And I say that not just as an angry opposition politician. I was the parliamentary secretary for trade under Ed Fast, the most effective trade minister in Canadian history, the Abbotsford MP. I also worked on trade in the private sector. So there's actually very few MPs that have that experience. We proposed to the Liberal government in negotiating NAFTA to put as priorities softwood lumber, our eternal irritant with the US, resources, manufacturing, and agriculture, all focused on jobs, all focused on the well-being of our economy. What were the Trudeau government's priorities for NAFTA negotiations with the last administration? Gender, Indigenous reconciliation, and environment. All nice policy issues, none of which appear in the agreement and none of which are parts of a trade agreement that are about rules of origin, tariff rates, and timelines. So Canadians have suffered because of an ideological approach by the Trudeau government where they seem more satisfied in making Twitter happy than making our allies happy. And this isn't just the United States. The state visit by the Prime Minister to India was not only an international embarrassment, it led to tariffs being imposed on Canadian agricultural goods and a decline in the relationship between Canada and India that had doubled in trade under the Conservative government. So the priority will be to fix the US relationships, do more on trade and security partnerships to make sure that Canadian manufacturers, steel and aluminum, are treated as domestic as they were in the Auto Pact of the 1960s. So we've got a lot of work to do, but fortunately, I served with the Americans when I was in the Canadian Armed Forces. I worked for one of the oldest and most respected US companies in the world, Procter & Gamble. I can be in Washington taken seriously from day one, and that's what I'll do to fight for Canadian interests.
Thank you. Small and medium-sized businesses are the driving engine of Canada's economy, and certainly that is reflected in Surrey. One of the main challenges that could have saved a lot of small businesses is that rental support program. And so now we see in the House, there is a bill that's been on the table. It's under debate and waiting for royal assent. Tell us about your thoughts about not only that commercial rent relief program, but other supports that could have helped small and medium-sized businesses better.
Well, this is a very important question. I'm glad you've asked it. I raised some of the small businesses in your area specifically to try and show the direct human impact of the shutdowns, of insolvencies. 2/3 of Canadians work for a small or medium-sized enterprise. If that segment of our economy is struggling, our economy and our employment situation for families will struggle. So our main concern was the wage subsidy by the Trudeau government was late. They set it at 10%. We said immediately it needed to be 75. They took several weeks to get there. So many businesses let go of people and put them on to serve. That was a cataclysmic mistake that we're still going to be paying for. The rent assistance, the fact that it was paid to landlords and many of whom didn't opt into the program, and it wasn't assistance to the tenants, but it was to the landlords, was another colossal mistake. This was raised in April, Anita. In fact, you can look to op-eds written by Pierre Poilievre and many of our MPs and critics in early May. The government prorogued the House of Commons rather than fix some of the programs that we'd been asking for them, that businesses, I'm sure the Board of Trade were asking for them to fix for months. They prorogued the House to avoid embarrassing questions in the WE scandal rather than fix programs that were desperately needed by businesses. So I'm glad they're doing it now. The Conservatives have supported these improvements to the rent program because we asked for them in April. We will work with them where we can to help Canadians, help small businesses, but we shouldn't have to wait half a year when businesses were struggling. You only need to look at two measures to show the failure of the government. The wage subsidy and the rent support programs didn't even come close to meeting the amount, the billions budgeted for those programs. Yet the CERB was vastly, by tens of billions, oversubscribed because businesses were failing, people were being let go because of ineffective economic response. We need to learn. I'm not critical for just being the sake of being critical. If you don't learn the lessons in business or in life so that you don't repeat them in the future, that's failed leadership. And that's what we've been seeing from the Prime Minister.
Erin, there's a lot of money being spent by the federal government. And the number one question that I've been getting since the beginning of the pandemic is how are we going to repay what we're spending? We have no fiscal sustainability, and really right now we're in a fiscal fog. We're in the second wave of the virus. What is your perspective on how we achieve some type of fiscal sustainability so that businesses, residents don't have to suffer tax increases in the future?
Great question. You know, when I in January, when I launched my leadership bid, I was developing policies based on a $30 billion structural deficit that the Trudeau government had accumulated. And now we're looking at deficits north of 300 billion. What I've said we need to do is to come up with a fiscal plan over a decade that gets us back to fiscal balance while also allowing supports, all based on employment and economic activity. So programs like CERB and others have to be wound up. They're actually hurting private sector hiring, particularly in the service and other entry-level jobs. They're hurting the small businesses that can't hire and that are already struggling. So we need to do that in a way that's fair. Any government spending should be focused on surviving the crisis for business and economic activity. As people come off the CERB or the new named CERB, if there's not a job for them, not only is there more demand on government supports, there's less economic activity. There's also less success for that family and community. With unemployment become addiction issues. With the opioid crisis in British Columbia, this can be a spiral that hurts communities, leads to crime. So the well-being of the family and the community is at the core of what we're doing, and jobs need to be at the center of that. And it's time, in my view, and I think the view of most Canadians, for a stop to this Ottawa knows best, where some jobs in technology or innovation are okay, but small business owners are branded as tax cheats. Our energy sector and forestry sector are vilified as being bad for the environment. We have to realize we're world leaders in everything we produce. We're the most ethical and environmentally conscious. We have the highest level of Indigenous engagement in business in the world. So let's get the economy moving by making sure every cylinder in the engine is firing, not picking and choosing winners. That's been both divisive. It's also making us less prosperous.
One of the other ingredients to economic recovery is investments in infrastructure to create jobs. So that includes the needed transportation investments, for example, that are needed in Surrey, investments in resources, the pipeline. What are your thoughts about that, and also its conjunction with the Canada Infrastructure Bank?
Well, Anita, I agree with you. Infrastructure can be not only critical in terms of that stimulus in a tough economy and in potential recession, it can build productivity and actually help build economic activity for the future. The best example that I know you know about well is the Pacific Gateway strategy that the Conservative government had, which actually helped build the infrastructure, roads, rail lines, and port facilities in British Columbia as we were signing trade agreements in Asia. I went to Seoul to help finalize the first free trade agreement with an Asian nation that we helped liberate with 513 Canadians who died in the Korean War, and they never forget that. So these infrastructure investments, wherever they can be multipliers for the economic activity, particularly facilitating our exports, we have to focus on it. I'm very bullish on the Indo-Pacific for Canada. That's why we have to improve and restore strong relations with India, the world's largest democracy. We've got a huge diaspora in Canada that has a potential for us to just grow trade exponentially. We saw that growth when the Conservatives were in. You know, the disruption in recent years has been really because of the Prime Minister's own conduct. So I think we can get back to growing that market. There's also growing markets in Vietnam, in Korea, Japan, in Indonesia. We need to support a Pacific strategy enhancement. I think the last Conservative government did that. The next one will as well.
Well, both the Surrey Board of Trade and the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, through Perrin Beatty, we are continuing to advocate for a Canada-India free trade agreement, significant economic benefits for both countries. My next question to you is related to the fact that in Surrey, for example, we have 104 different languages that are spoken. And how is the Conservative Party reflective of that type of demographics? And how is it becoming more inclusive to attract more candidates from ethnic communities?
Thanks, Anita. You know, the 104 languages, that's an incredible strength for Surrey. And I'm sure you see that all the time as export markets are being driven. So many times the diaspora community and these linkages internationally, sometimes I'm sure through partnerships, the Surrey Board of Trade, South Asian Business Association have these people-to-people tie, the language, the business culture connections are huge for facilitating market entry for Canadian products, Canadian innovation. Our services trade, for example, you know, the architecture, legal services, financial insurance is even bigger than our goods trade in many parts of the world. And so this is a huge strength for Surrey, for the Lower Mainland, and for the Greater Toronto Area. And if anyone was crazy enough to wait up till 1:30 in the morning Ontario time, it wasn't quite as late your time, to see my first speech as Conservative leader, you'll see that I want more Canadians seeing the Conservative Party standing up for them and seeing themselves reflected in the Conservative Party. We have to have more candidates that bring these perspectives from cultural communities, from different walks of life. So I'm reaching out. I'm very proud of the track record we've had. I just celebrated a virtual Diwali yesterday because the one on Parliament Hill can't be held, unfortunately. That was started by 20 years ago by my friend, the late Deepak Obrai, and his daughter maintained it through the help of BC MP Todd Doherty. And we had MPs from all parties. We had members of both all parts of the Indo-Canadian community joined to celebrate the rich diversity of Canada and the success that so many communities have had within Canada. And I tried to address that in my speech. You're going to see we're already getting tremendous interest across this country for people to run for us. And that's usually a good sign of momentum. We have races in parts of the country where we haven't had an MP in over a decade. So we're going to see a Conservative caucus that reflects a growing, ambitious Canada of the next 10, 20, 30 years.
You know, one of the pieces before the pandemic is the issue of skill shortages and the declining birth rate of Canadians, the immigration policies that have been put in place. What is your perspective about that? I just wanted to one more thing is that in Surrey, many of our businesses were able to still be open. We have a thriving construction development sector, thriving manufacturing sector that were able to still stay open, supply goods nationally, internationally, but they're still facing skill shortages. And just wondering what your perspective on that is, as well as immigration policies.
Another great question. And this one particularly drives me crazy. I saw this when Ed Fast was the trade minister and I was the parliamentary secretary. The joke is Ed Fast would go to Paris, France. I'd go to Paris, Ontario as the parliamentary secretary. And my job was building capacity for exporting amongst the small and medium-sized exporters. I worked with boards of trade across the country to build up that capacity. And what was crazy at the time is when you look into the skill shortage and you look into businesses needing to rely on temporary foreign workers to fill gaps, we track every shortage in Canada. We have a system called National Occupation Codes, and we use that for filling temporary gaps because of productivity. Why are we not using that both to improve and enhance our immigration system, make it faster, get more people in permanently? We should also be using it within federal, provincial skills training and investments on skills upgrading for people who are out of work, people who are in high school and college. Innovators like BCIT have a great ability to match and partner with businesses to enhance their productivity, to train people to fill those gaps. Right now, we have no federal plan for that. So this is where in the military, in the private sector, if you see an issue, you develop a plan and fix it. The bureaucracy in Ottawa will never fix itself. It's a river that will just keep flowing in the same direction until you build a dam and divert it to fix something. So I think, this is an opportunity for a business-minded and innovative a government that will be based on partnerships with private sector, with industry, with stakeholder groups. That's what you'll see from us. And the skills piece is key. We also need to get immigration faster. Family reunification can help us sometimes within the pandemic. We've seen families at risk with an aged parent or with no school or education, childcare. That family reunification piece, if done properly, an aunt and member of the family, an uncle, could come and help families struggling. So we have to go and get rid of the backlogs that we've seen build up in the last few years. Also bring in skilled people faster. So I'm going to really demand excellence in reforming some of these old and tired systems.
Good. Less red tape too. What about climate change and environmental leadership as an engine of economic recovery? What's your perspective on that?
Well, this is an important question because people will often be surprised when I reflect on our party. I'm very proud to be a Conservative MP. I'm proud to lead the party that founded Canada. But we also have to recognize we didn't meet Canadians' expectations in the last two elections with respect to the environment. I'm going to fix that. The most green prime minister in Canadian history was actually Conservative. It was Brian Mulroney, and I've talked to him about this. I think we can come up with smart, innovative ways to reduce emissions, reduce water usage, conserve, be seen as strong stewards. And we have to show what we're going to do, because while I don't support a national carbon tax, I think it's wildly uncompetitive what the Trudeau government has done nationally. If we oppose something, we also have to propose something. And I think this is what Canadians will see with our team. And literally every one of my colleagues that's on this call, Carrie Lynn, Nellie, Tamara Taiko, we've all talked about this. And I think Canadians will see a Conservative Party that has a series of partnership programs with the provinces, with industry, better ideas for transportation and other high GHG sectors, and not a tax approach, but an innovation, a partnership, and a targeted regulatory approach, because it is important for us to reduce our emissions. I've got a 14-year-old daughter and a 9-year-old son. I want them to have a great Canada that's known for a strong environment. We have to do our part. So you'll see a real commitment before the next election on that, Anita. And I think Canadians will be looking for a real plan, not just more tax.
Well, speaking of taxes, we have been advocating for a very long time for a comprehensive rehaul of Canada's tax system. What are your plans to advocate for that? It's just such a huge burden to the bottom line of businesses.
Yes, I hear this all the time. And, I worked for a big business, Procter & Gamble, a great company, but I also, as a lawyer, worked for a number of small businesses, startups. And SMEs, small businesses, are so important for our economy. And a lot of them can't afford the army of lawyers and accountants that Procter & Gamble and other bigger companies can handle. And the more complex, the more burdensome, the more red tape that there is in our system of taxation, that is an economic burden and a showstopper in some cases for small businesses. So we're going to try and simplify. We are going to look at a way to reduce that burden. I'm also very, very proud. Our caucus last week voted to stop the unfair and abusive audits by CRA of small businesses in the middle of a pandemic. They're having audits ordered on them as they're teetering on the edge of insolvency. And we've said, delay that, please. The government hasn't been transparent. We haven't had a budget in the longest time in Canadian history, yet the tax man is burdening small businesses and pushing them over the cliff. I hope Suk, who's still on there, says that Mr. Trudeau should not have whipped his MPs to vote against small business as he did last week. This was an opposition motion that had all parties support it except the Liberal government. Why? It was just delaying an audit that was killing small business. So you're going to see the Conservatives, the champion for the SME space. As I said, 2/3 of Canadians work for a small to medium-sized enterprise. Like the successes we've seen in Surrey, we need to help them and give them more flexibility in the middle of a pandemic, not sick the tax man on them.
What's your perspective about what we've seen during this pandemic is a lot of inequalities, access to supports, poverty issues, discussions about universal basic income. All of these types of conversations are now coming to the fore. What's your perspective on all of that?
This is another great question, Anita. Thank you. Conservatives have to look at this issue very, very seriously because I do see some inequalities, not just rural and urban and some region of the country versus the others. There's increasingly a division between people that have a university education, for example, and people that don't. This is why I'm reaching out. I'm trying to build partnerships with trade unions, with nonprofits, any group that wants to provide growth to the economy and economic opportunity, whether for someone who's lost their job or someone new to Canada or with needs skills upgrading. We need to raise up those people. That's why I talk about the nobility of work. That's why I talk about, I value my time washing dishes, inspecting pipeline and pumping gas as much as I do working on Bay Street in a large law firm. There's a nobility inherent in work. And as I said, the new Canadian experience, when people come here, I see it all the time in the Lower Mainland. I had an event before COVID with a trucking company in Brampton, where within one generation, a family was employing 300 other families. It's really incredible. So how can we make sure there's opportunity, whatever your station in life, whatever your education level? And this is why the Trudeau government's approach that they're against the energy industry, they're against softwood, they're against manufacturing, and they're for Google. We need opportunity for everyone. And especially after a pandemic, we need people to be working. And I think you're going to see other parties suggesting we turn the CERB into a permanent basic income. That will kill small businesses. That will kill the service sector. We're already seeing what the CERB has done. So let's give more people opportunity to reach their greatest success. We have to address those inequalities, but not through socialism, through smart and modern capitalism and smart public policy.
I'm just going to go back a little bit about the workforce issues. We're in the second wave of the virus, and we have so many businesses that are facing significant issues related to staffing. Some have had to make the unfortunate choice to let go, lay off. Some are having challenges bringing back staff because they feel so anxious about coming back to work. Productivity is on the line. If you were Prime Minister, how would you support small business during these times and beyond the pandemic?
Another great question. What I've said, any spending by the federal government right now should be focused at preserving economic activity, preserving jobs. The more jobs we maintain, that's fewer people on CERB, that's more businesses that will thrive again once the economy returns. We also have to work on productivity, which means simplifying tax and regulation and encouraging investment. We did that during the last global recession through accelerating the capital cost allowance. We can also do this through change in some tax policies, looking at things like flow-through shares and other things to free up domestic capital for investment in startups to scale up companies. We should be encouraging innovation, unlike the Trudeau Liberals and the NDP, who are looking at taxing stock options and others. If we want to send Hootsuite and all the tech players in the Lower Mainland running to the States, all we have to do is look at what's being planned by the Liberals or the NDP. Sometimes I have a difficulty telling the two parties apart, to be honest with you. We need to foster innovation, foster investment. And in some areas, that means the government should be foregoing some tax revenue if it means people will plow that investment into growing opportunity in Canada. As I said, the workforce also needs enhancement through skills training and a smarter immigration system, faster getting people here faster. That's going to be a real focus for us. Some of these programs, Anita, haven't really been changed substantially since the 1970s or 80s. It's time that coming out of COVID, we need a modern, more inclusive, more engaged Canada for a stronger economy in the future.
My final question to you, Erin, is around the vaccine. And just wondering what your thoughts are about vaccine distribution when it actually gets here. Everyone thinks it's the answer for our economy to go back to normal. What are your thoughts?
Well, I say, my caucus colleagues will be tired of hearing me say this, but the Trudeau government has not learned the lessons from the first wave of the pandemic. The fact that we're one of the only OECD countries without a major rollout of rapid testing, for example. Some airports in Europe were kept open for extra months because of rapid testing. Rapid testing allows you more flexibility. We were the last in line. The tracing app, testing and tracing was the priority the Prime Minister set on his step in March. The tracing app's not being used in British Columbia. The testing is not here. So what we have to do before we even get to the vaccine, Anita, is look at learning the lessons, solidify the protection around the vulnerable as much as possible, support the production of domestic PPE and other critical supplies. I was involved directly in that with Premier Ford. We brought one of the world's best, most innovative mask companies manufacturing in China. They're now manufacturing in Barrie, Ontario. We also need to use distancing, mask use, and other practices to keep as much economic activity moving while we protect the vulnerable. Then when we get to a period where we have a vaccine, we should have a deployment that is the same way. Deploy in a way that protects the vulnerable and critical population centers in the most efficient way possible so that we maintain as strong as possible of an economy. We've all seen, I've seen it in my own social networks, the impact of the pandemic on mental health, on addictions. There's been more opioid deaths in British Columbia than COVID deaths. We can't lose sight of all these other things as we balance public health, which is critical, and the economy. So the vaccine factors into this. This is why we're so disappointed with rapid testing, and we haven't seen domestic capability in key sectors yet. And we have to empower employers to demonstrate plans to operate safely. And then they should do that. I also think, final thing, because I think the government has not even released all data. They've lacked transparency on spending and a whole range of things, but we don't even have a proper tracing of where people were infected with COVID. I got COVID, Anita, as you may have read. I recovered well, my wife did. I caught it in the workplace. We don't even know the proportion that got it in a gym or a restaurant or an airline. Those are opaque. The government should be providing Canadians with information, not only so that they can make informed decisions, so that we can plan to maintain as strong as possible of an economy while also taking public health as a paramount consideration. But right now, we have imperfect information. We have a government that's not transparent and a government that didn't even learn the lessons of the first wave. So I'm going to demand excellence. I don't want to compete against the United States, the worst student in the class. We should be competing against the best student in the class, Taiwan, other countries, and I haven't seen that approach from the Trudeau government.
Well, Erin, thank you so much for responding to my rapid fire questions to you. And I'm going to bring in our presenting sponsor from the Port of Vancouver, Mr. Peter Zada. Peter, over to you.
Thanks, Anita. And it's indeed my pleasure on behalf of the Surrey Board of Trade and the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority to thank you, Mr. O'Toole, for sharing your vision for Canada's economic future with us today. You can imagine at the Board of Trade and indeed at the Port of Vancouver, we recognize that a strong vision for Canada's economic future is the foundation for achieving many, if not most, of our national goals. We appreciate your insights today as you take on your new role and continue to work undoubtedly, I heard, very hard for the benefit of all Canadians. At the Port Authority, we also work for the benefit of all Canadians in collaboration with our partners, stakeholders, and other members of the port community. Our vision is for the Port of Vancouver to be the world's most sustainable port, something we can only do by working alongside many others in the port, including government. We define a sustainable port as one that delivers economic prosperity through trade, maintains a healthy environment, enables thriving communities, many of the themes I think that you touched on in your comments today. We approach our work, all our work, through these three sustainability pillars, collaborating with industry partners, federal, local governments, and local communities to ensure that the breadth of voices that we hear inform our efforts to keep this gateway strong and competitive for Canada. The Port of Vancouver is a significant economic generator, as you also have noted, not only in this region, but in the entire country, generating about 115,000 jobs nationally, contributing 11.9 billion in the nation's GDP. 2020 has been a challenging year. The diversity of cargo handled through the Port of Vancouver is one of the key strengths. It's really a reflection of that diversity of the Canadian economy and allows the port to be resilient through periods of economic downturn, such as now during the pandemic. Preparing for the future preparing for future growth is key to sustaining that resilience. To this end, we're leading a variety of projects, including those that maximize existing terminals, and we're looking at innovative ways to address road and rail bottlenecks while reducing impacts on communities. Some of these projects are benefactors of the national trade programs that you mentioned in your comments today. One such example, though, is the proposed Roberts Bank Terminal 2 project in Delta. Forecasts indicate that the West Coast Marine Container Terminal capacity will be fully utilized potentially in as few as 5 to 6 years from now. With this looming timeline in mind, we have proposed the Roberts Bank Terminal project to construct a new container terminal in deep water with access to efficient rail and road infrastructure. Without more container capacity, there will be lost economic opportunity, higher costs, and potentially negative impacts on port users and host communities. This project is several years into a federal environmental review, and we're hoping for a positive federal decision as early as 2021. Importantly, the project will also introduce a third-party investor and operator in the gateway, which is critical to the overall competitiveness of this sector. I'm grateful for the strong partnerships between the Port Authority and our partners, including our federal public representatives like Mr. O'Toole. And thank you. I want to thank you for your encouraging and insightful comments today, particularly those, as you can imagine, regarding the importance of trade and infrastructure. And I look forward to continuing to work together to keep this gateway strong and competitive for all Canadians. Thank you again for your time and your comments today, Mr. O'Toole.
Thank you, Peter. Let me just say, Peter, thank you to your team who a year and a half ago gave me a wonderful tour of the authority, including the new terminal capacity project. And so thank you for that. It seems like a lifetime ago. I was the Foreign Affairs Shadow Minister. Now I'm the leader. And I'm only more renewed on how important our capacity is on the West Coast. So thank you for what you do.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter, and to the Port of Vancouver, and definitely another example of needed infrastructure to create jobs during the economic recovery. Erin, do you have any final words before we sign off?
Well, Captain, thank you for this very important voyage we took together. I want to thank all my colleagues for also being a part of this. As I said, I want more people to know a little bit more about me. It's sad that I'm doing my BC tour virtually from Ottawa today, but I hope you get a flavor for what the Conservative Party is going to be doing in the next election, which is looking to build partnerships, looking to work on prosperity, and to make sure that we're better prepared, more resilient as a country in the future. So thank you, Anita, personally for your time today. And again, as a veteran, I appreciate your work as an honorary naval captain. It means a lot to military families.
Thank you so much. And thank you for being with us today on behalf of the Surrey Board of Trade and the South Asian Business Association. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us. Check out our programs, our events to help your business, your community at businessinsurrey.com, where we are making Surrey an opportunity city.